Rumors coming out of Cleveland tonight hint at something far bigger than another painful loss. Reports claim the locker room didn't just fall silent, it erupted in a way nobody outside the building saw coming. And at the center of it all is one line that, according to insiders, hit the franchise harder than any blown coverage or missed throw this season. People inside the organization are whispering that a single moment may have cracked open weeks of frustration, unanswered questions, and tension bubbling just beneath the surface. So what really happened in that room, and why are so many players privately saying it changed everything? That's the part nobody expected, and the part the entire league is suddenly talking about. For weeks, the signs were there, even if nobody in the organization wanted to admit it. Reports suggest the frustration didn't start with one bad throw or a single blown drive, but with a slow, steady unraveling that everyone in the locker room could feel. Players were noticing the same patterns creeping in every Sunday: stalled possessions, missed timing, and a rhythm that never quite clicked, no matter how much preparation went into the game plan. According to people close to the team, veteran players began exchanging quiet looks on the sideline as if they all understood the real issue, but weren't willing to say it out loud. The coaching staff, meanwhile, seemed locked into the same approach week after week, refusing to adjust even as the offense kept sinking deeper into the same problems. And that's when whispers, barely noticeable at first, started turning into real conversations, questions about leadership, about direction, and about why the obvious fixes weren't happening. It was a pressure building silently, the kind that doesn't explode immediately, but definitely doesn't disappear. The turning point came during a game that, according to several insiders, felt doomed from the opening drive. What started as another chance to straighten the season out quickly turned into the performance that reportedly pushed the entire roster past its breaking point. The offense never found its footing, passes drifting off target, plays collapsing before they even developed, and a rhythm that looked completely out of sync from the moment the ball was snapped. Rumors say veteran receivers were shaking their heads after routes, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion from watching the same mistakes repeat themselves. Defensive players, who had been carrying the team for weeks, were seen exchanging tired, almost defeated looks as yet another drive stalled out. By the time a late-game turnover erased Cleveland's best scoring chance, the mood on the sideline had shifted completely. Insiders describe it as the exact moment when quiet frustration transformed into something heavier, a realization that nothing was going to change unless someone finally said what everyone had been thinking. And that sense of inevitability is what set the stage for what happened after the final whistle. Inside the locker room, the atmosphere reportedly felt heavier than any loss this season. Players walked in without saying much, the kind of silence that doesn't come from disappointment alone, but from exhaustion, mental, emotional, and competitive. According to people familiar with the scene, helmets were dropped quietly, not slammed, as if nobody even had the energy to pretend things were fine anymore. The room was so still that some players said it felt like everyone was waiting for something to happen, something they knew was coming but didn't want to be the first to trigger. Stefanski tried to deliver his usual post-game message, the familiar points about execution and staying patient, but insiders say his words floated through the room without landing on a single player. Eyes were down, shoulders slumped. It wasn't disrespect, it was resignation. Reports claim that even the players who normally try to keep morale high looked disconnected, almost like they'd finally run out of ways to justify what they were watching on the field. What made the moment even more intense, according to several accounts, was the sense that everyone in that room knew the real issue, but had been pretending not to. The tension didn't come from anger at one another, it came from the long stretch of unspoken truth hanging over the team, thick enough that some players later described it as waiting for the air to break. And in that hush, with frustration stretching thinner by the second, it became clear that someone was eventually going to speak up. They just didn't know who or how loudly. According to multiple reports, the silence finally cracked when Shadur decided he'd heard enough. He didn't stand up dramatically, didn't raise his voice, and didn't make it about ego. What insiders describe is something far more controlled, almost calm. He simply looked up, waited for the room to settle, and delivered the line that has been echoing through the franchise ever since. Those who were there say he spoke with a steady tone, not frustration, not anger, but just conviction. And the moment the words left his mouth, the entire locker room froze. Rumors say heads turned instantly. Coaches stopped mid-sentence. Veterans leaned in as if they already knew where he was going, but needed to hear it out loud. It wasn't just what he said, though. It was how confidently he said it.
Insiders claim you could feel a shift run through the room, something sharp enough to cut through weeks of denial. What caught the coaching staff off guard, according to those familiar with the situation, was the reaction. Instead of pushback and tension, reports say players reportedly nodded almost immediately. Some even looked relieved, like someone had finally opened the door they'd all been pressed against. One source described it as the moment the whole room exhaled, because Shadur had vocalized what nearly everyone had been thinking but nobody had dared to say publicly.
Teammates didn't view it as a challenge to authority. They viewed it as honesty the team desperately needed. Reports suggest players across the room exchanged glances that said more than words, "Finally." And that single declaration, delivered so simply, became the spark that turned quiet frustration into unified momentum. The locker room wasn't divided by what he said. If anything, it became clear he had just voiced the reality the entire roster had been living with for far too long. What makes this moment even more powerful, according to several insiders, is the growing belief inside the locker room that Shadur has already earned the team's trust long before he ever touched the field. Reports suggest players have watched him prepare with the kind of intensity that usually belongs to established starters, studying film late, running extra reps, and treating every practice snap like it actually counted. Veterans have allegedly taken notice of how he carries himself, not with arrogance, but with a quiet certainty that spreads through the room. Some teammates reportedly talk about how his timing in drills feels sharper, how his reads look quicker, and how the offense seems to breathe easier when he steps into the huddle. Rumors say receivers feel a different level of confidence running routes for him, believing the ball will arrive where it needs to be. Even defensive players, who usually stay out of quarterback debates, are said to be impressed by the way he processes pressure and stays composed. It's not just talent, it's presence, and that's why the support for him didn't appear overnight. It's been building quietly, steadily, until the moment his words finally aligned with what the team had already been feeling. To them, he didn't just demand a role, he voiced the truth they'd been waiting to acknowledge. Behind the scenes, the moment Shadur spoke reportedly sent shockwaves straight through the coaching staff, placing Kevin Stefanski under a level of pressure he hasn't faced since taking the job. According to several insiders, the organization is now wrestling with the growing gap between what the coaching staff insists is the long-term plan and what players believe is the obvious short-term answer. Every week of offensive stagnation has only widened that divide. People familiar with the situation say front office personnel who once backed Stefanski's commitment to the current depth chart are privately questioning whether loyalty to a preseason decision is now costing the team winnable games. And when performance issues stack up this consistently, the spotlight always shifts upward. At the same time, the analytics department has reportedly presented data that paints a clear picture, one that many players feel has been ignored for too long. According to those aware of internal discussions, the numbers show a growing mismatch between the offense's potential and its execution, with several indicators suggesting the team may be holding back a more dynamic option. Fan sentiment isn't helping either. Online pressure has exploded in recent days, with supporters demanding a quarterback change and national analysts questioning why Cleveland continues sticking to a script that clearly isn't working. Insiders say this outside noise has only intensified the internal debate, creating a situation that feels increasingly unstable. What adds even more weight to Stefanski's dilemma is the locker room's unified reaction to Shedur's statement. Reports claim that veteran leaders, offensive captains, and even defensive stars have quietly aligned themselves behind him, making this far more than a simple coaching decision. When an entire roster centers around one voice, resisting that shift becomes risky, possibly even damaging. According to people close to the team, Stefanski now finds himself in a nearly impossible spot. Change course and admit the initial evaluation was off, or stand firm and risk losing the trust of players who believe the truth is already obvious. Either choice comes with consequences, and insiders say the margin for error is narrowing by the hour. If the organization chooses to stay the course, insiders warn the consequences could stretch far beyond another rough game or two.
According to several reports, the biggest risk isn't just continued offensive struggles, it's the slow erosion of trust inside the locker room. Players who feel their effort is being wasted often begin to detach, not out of disrespect, but out of self-preservation. Rumors suggest some veterans are already worried that ignoring the clear momentum behind Shadur might send a message that performance doesn't matter as much as protecting earlier decisions. And once that belief starts spreading, it becomes harder to pull a team back together. There's also the reality, according to people familiar with similar situations, that quiet frustration can turn into something more visible. When players sense the organization isn't listening, leadership voices, both formal and informal, tend to grow louder behind closed doors. That's when tension can start influencing practices, film sessions, and even sideline dynamics. Insiders speculate that refusing to acknowledge the shift in the locker room sentiment could create a long-term credibility problem for the coaching staff, one that lingers even if the team eventually turns things around. And beyond the walls of the facility, the pressure only gets heavier. Fans who already feel misled by repeated offensive stagnation may lose patience completely. Analysts will continue questioning the franchise's direction. And if the roster believes the solution is sitting on the bench, every week without change becomes another reminder of what could have been. The danger, according to those watching closely, isn't just losing games, it's losing the belief that the team is truly trying to win. And once that belief fades, the consequences ripple far deeper than a single position battle. When the dust finally settles, this entire moment may be remembered as the night Cleveland's future shifted, whether the organization wanted it to or not. Reports suggest the locker room has already made its choice, the fans have voiced theirs, and even the data seems to point in the same direction. What remains uncertain is whether the people in charge are willing to recognize the momentum building right in front of them. Because this isn't just about one player speaking up or one coach holding firm. It's about a franchise standing at a crossroads, staring down a decision that could define the rest of its season. And if the heartbeat of the team has already moved toward a new leader, how long can the organization afford to look the other way? That's the question hanging over Cleveland now, and it's one nobody can avoid much longer.